Dr. Emily Landau, because I'm sure that you're looking at the Iranian elections very closely, and many can say that these were actually elections, or so the Western media is describing it, between those who are for the Iran deal with world powers and those who are against. And is this actually something to look at, that the people of Iran, or the people who are voting in Iran, are looking to strive more towards the West and away from the hardline Ayatollah, very rigid mentality that we are so afraid of?
I think that the results of this election seem to show, and I agree very much with what Ali said, we have to wait for the final results. If you look at the analysis that's come out so far, you can find a whole range of interpretations of what happened, from, a great win for the Reformists to, well, the hardliners are still in power. Some are describing it as, the hardliners versus the hardliners, or between the bad and the worse. But I think that there is a sense that as far as the people of Iran are concerned, or at least the people of Tehran are concerned, I think we can safely say that there are a lot of people that do want change. The question is whether that will translate into real changes in policy. And here I think we need to be very careful about how we read the results. First of all, we need to remember that before the election, so many candidates were disqualified. Something around the order of 99%
and most
of the reformists
right,
were disqualified. So now when we see the headlines that the reformists have won, it's actually not the reformists. These are people that call themselves moderates, pragmatists, independents. They're not the reformists. There's a mistake here in the way the media has been portraying this.
They're still not aligned with the so-called party line.
But they're not the reformists. The reformists were disqualified. They were not allowed to run even for the Majlis. And the other thing that we need to remember is that whatever the result of these elections, and here again, I very much agree with what Ali said, reminding us about the Revolutionary Guards, and I think we need to be reminded also about the Supreme Leader and his power here. And as far as foreign policy is concerned, I think most analysts are saying that even with the most rosy interpretation, the most optimistic interpretation of the election results, we're not going to see real changes as far as Iran's foreign policy, the way they're relating to the region, in the nuclear realm. Just look at what's been happening, since the deal was announced. I think the Supreme Leader was very careful ahead of these elections to make sure that his powers would not be curtailed.
And yeah, it is true that we did not have the nuclear deal, but we had a period where we have President Mohammad Khatami, and immediately after it was Ahmadinejad, who was the president.
The hardliners, golden boy. So
absolutely. So this is why we should still wait to see the official results and to see what would be the next step of this acts of Rafsanjani Rouhani.
But on the nuclear deal, let me just say that within the debate in the United States, you can certainly see the interpretations are going along the lines of the supporters of the deal and the opposition to the deal.
And I think one person that is that we want to check about, because in the United States that's how they're looking at, and we're joined from Washington, D.C., and I'm very grateful for that because it's late there, by Trita Parsi, President of the National Iranian American Council. And Mr. Parsi, I want to thank you very much for joining us this late hour. This late hour for you. If you had a chance to listen to what was going to the discussion in the studio right now, I'm assuming that the Iranian community in exile, so to speak, in Washington, around the world, is looking very closely at these elections. And I want to start by just asking you, what do you think of the results that we know of at this point? And what does it signify when it comes to the future of Iran vis-a-vis its relations with the West?
Well, I think what it does signify is that the Iranian people have taken a very wise decision, recognizing that the system is flawed. These elections, at the end of the day, are not what we would call democratic elections in the West. However, they are consequential, and they are the lowest risk way of making sure that you can get some change peacefully. And getting peaceful change is something that is ranking pretty high in the Middle East right now when you take a look around in the rest of the region.
That's putting
so
it mildly.
Despite the limitations and the problems, they've gone out in large numbers and in some ways voted more against those who they didn't want to see in power, rather than necessarily voting in favor of specific individuals. And I think what it also does show is that those who constantly rejected the relevance of Iranian elections did not misread the flaws of the system. They're there. But they may have misread something much more important, which is the strength of the Iranian society and their ability to navigate this and push it in the direction that they want.
It's sometimes amazing to see turnout of the democracy that can actually, well, you know, democracy is a strong word in this case, but people actually going out to vote. And exactly as you mentioned, Mr. Parsi, Ali Waqidar, I'm a Middle East analyst, has a question for you. Yes.
Mr. Parsi, how do you interpret that these are the first elections to take place after the nuclear deal, and yet there was a certain regression in the percentage of people who participated in these elections?
Well, I don't think there was a regression, because it's only regression if you compare it to the presidential elections. And historically, the parliamentary elections have always had a lower turnout than the presidential elections. You have the same phenomena in the United States, where, first of all, the participation is already, unfortunately, quite low in comparison to many other countries. But it's always lower in the midterm elections, when there's only congressional elections, compared to when you have presidential elections. I do believe, however, that a lot of folks expected it to be a little bit higher than this, and I think the lower numbers may have been a very new phenomena, which is that it was actually this time more hardline elements of the population who did not participate in the elections, whereas in Tehran we saw a very high participation and a stunning victory for the moderates.
For the moderates. Mr. Parsi, it's fascinating times, and I want to thank you because it will probably harass you in the near future. Again, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Emily, you wanted to say?
No, I just wanted to say that Ali was right, that there have been larger turnouts for the parliamentary elections. I think the numbers are not outstanding one way or the other for this time.
And what we're learning from these elections, Yael, that it's not only in Israel that we have the state of Tel Aviv versus the state of Israel. In Iran, there is the state of Tehran versus the other country.
But their numbers in the parliament are so low compared to the 290.
To the rest of the country, yes. But I think election is the leading overline, though, as something interesting to look at this year around, all around the world. I want to thank you all for joining me on this issue as we move along.